Yes, LinkedIn, we are live. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depends from which part of the world you're tuning in, guys. And thank you for joining another weekly feedback Q&A session. Today, for the first time, this piece of equipment here is for the Clubhouse. So as much as I'm doing it on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, Instagram occasionally as well, today I have to sacrifice Instagram to do it on the Clubhouse, just to test it out, guys. And this is another weekly feedback Q&A session. Now, what is today's theme, guys? Let me ask you a question. Have you shared the feedback with your team that was well intended? It was really valuable feedback on your behalf. And you realize that in the first 10 to 20 seconds, people tend to respond to it quite defensively, which is a little bit confusing, but quite common. See, often without realizing, we are the source of that defensive response, defensive attitude from people. And it's not something that we do intentionally, and it's not something that we're doing with realizing, but quite often it is a result of our habits that we've picked up over the years, and we are bringing them into a feedback conversation. And how we start conversation typically dictates how people will respond to our feedback, whether they will lean in with curiosity or step back a little bit with defensive attitude and stay a little bit cautious. And how we start the conversation quite often influences what the response will be like. And so today, in today's session, guys, we are going to discuss those habits that we have picked up over the years as managers and as individuals that we're bringing into feedback conversation, because quite often they are a result either of what we have observed and picked up from our managers. So when there is absence of formal feedback training, and that's definitely was the case when I became the manager, it's almost as if it's expected. Hey, here's your job title, you're the manager, now it's your job to provide the feedback. And we're like, hold on, wait a minute, like, what do you mean I need to provide a feedback? I'm not necessarily sure how to do that. I'm not confident with that. All I know is I don't want to upset people, and what you're telling me is it's my job to do so now. And it's quite frequently happening. What we tend to do is to do our very best, and we do that based on what we've observed from our fellow managers, whether whilst we are working with managers and we're observing how they provide feedback. All of a sudden we are more focused and aware of observing others how they provide feedback, because that now it's our job. Or we've been in that receiving end and we remember how it was delivered, and without knowing what to do, we just replicate that. And unfortunately, quite often we are creating that defensive response from the managers, guys. So what are those certain habits that we've picked up? I would say we can split them into a certain beliefs that we are holding about feedback that are outdated, and they're not helping us with creating this engaging feedback conversation. There are also a certain habits with our communication that we have without paying too much attention how we communicate, certain ways of starting feedback conversation, certain phrases acting as a trigger to that defensive state, to the defensive response when we're sharing the feedback. And so I'll share a few of those today, guys. And if you have some questions, please let me know. And very quickly, if you are, especially on the LinkedIn, watching now, could you please just type something in the comment section below so I know all the tech is working? I would really appreciate that. Some of our habits are part of our mindset as well that we have. So let's just break it down a little bit more in details, guys. And I will start with the concept of the feedback itself, especially the word feedback. One of the habits that we have and mistakes that we do is that we are using the word feedback quite frequently in the workplace. Now, I think we can all agree that feedback is important. We all know that we need feedback. We know that it's really important to share the feedback with people. But when we are part of the conversations, things are slightly different. All of a sudden, those beliefs and understanding almost as if it's being thrown out of the window, and now emotions are entering the stage and things are difficult. Now, word feedback itself. What do you think and how do you feel when I mention to you, hey, I have some feedback for you? How do you feel when you know that incoming conversation is a feedback conversation with your manager? More likely than not, more often than not, we tend to assume the negative outcome. That's our human nature. We tend to assume a negative outcomes. And when it comes to feedback, as soon as we hear feedback, one of the first connotations and the first association with it is something that is negative. I'm in trouble. I will hear something that they want to hear rather than being curious and excited about it. And here's the thing, when it comes to feedback conversations, it's just as stressful for the manager who provides it as it is for the employee who receives that. And if you are the manager, you know what I'm talking about. Even if you're not, there are moments when it was your time to provide the feedback, and as you were heading up to it, how do you feel? A little bit nervous or confident? More often than not, we're a little bit nervous. There is one research that I found fascinating, and it's a really telling one as well. At some point, a group of researchers took a group of consultants and they were doing role play selling exercises. And they thought that the exercise was about how well they sell products. And they connected the heart rate monitors to them. What they didn't know is that the real purpose of that research, and that was to see how people behave during impromptu feedback, right? So at the end of the conversation, I think it was like 3 minutes long, one group were told, now you have to provide the feedback to the other person, all of a sudden, and the other group was told that now you're going to receive feedback. And what's interesting is that for both people, heart rate increased up to 50% the second they realize they have to provide the feedback or they are on that receiving end of the feedback. That's quite stressful if you ask me, but I'm not surprised. If I look in examples, when I had to share the feedback, especially the challenging one, especially the difficult one, or negative, as some people say, or constructive criticism, we tend to be a little bit nervous about it. Using the word feedback in the workplace and framing everything as a feedback conversation doesn't really help us reducing that anxiety, reducing that awkwardness. The way I always look at it is, think about your home experience. If you have a conversation with your partner, with your wife, with your husband, with your kids, or your friends, do you use a word feedback? How often are you using word feedback? My guess is almost none, if none at all. Right? I can't remember when I sat down with my son and told him, hey, I have some feedback for you. Right? We don't do that. At work, for some reason, we switch to that and we use the word a feedback conversation. And that in itself has already such a negative connotation, as I mentioned, that it doesn't really help bringing that stress levels down. So my advice would be practice. Stop using the word feedback. There is no need for that almost at all. Even when you're requesting for feedback, you have to frame it that you need some feedback from people, right? Because when they hear, oh, it's my turn to provide feedback, again, they get a little bit nervous and agitated, as we mentioned. And one of my friends from Feedwork, I think a week or two ago, they post something about that you shouldn't be asking for feedback. Ask for advice, opinion is different than asking for feedback. And it's a good post. It's a good advice as well here, because we need to stop framing things I'm going to ask for feedback. I'm just curious. I'm just going to find out how to do things. I've got some question for you. I'm curious with that, rather than I need some sort of feedback. And I understand the irony here, because I call myself a feedback coach and I work as a feedback coach and it's in my title and all that. I get it. I do that because it's easier for people to understand what I do. But hopefully one day I can completely take it away from my tagline. So the first mindset shift that is required, guys, in order to create a safe environment around you, safe feedback conversations, would be stop using or limit using the word feedback itself. Even in your own mind, don't think that you have to provide feedback to your team, right? Frame it as you're going to have a conversation with your team. You're going to help your team, the person, to grow. You're going to share your observation. You're going to share the idea. You're going to ask some questions. You're going to clarify something. It doesn't have to be framed, even in your own mind, as a feedback conversation. Okay, so that would be the first one. The second one, the second mindset shift, in my opinion, that needs to happen is shifting our understanding and belief that it's my manager's job to provide me with the feedback, to develop me. If you're the manager right now, then let me ask you a question. How many plates you're spinning right now? Are you busy chasing your own tail? How busy are you as a manager? My guess is that you're super busy. And we have this tendency as employees, and even if we are managers, we have managers above us, we tend to shift the responsibility of our personal development into management's hands, and we wait for feedback to come our way. Let me tell you something. Your managers are just as busy as you are. And I'm assuming it, but it's highly likely that your employees also feel that you're not providing them with enough feedback and coaching and support. You're not developing them. Personal development is one of the most important things for us as an individuals, and especially for millennials and Gen Z, they're very vocal about, I need development when I join a company. So when they're looking for brands to join, when they're looking for managers to work for, they look for managers that have those coach-like abilities, that it will develop them and grow them. And that's important. What holds us back, unfortunately, in the workplace is the mindset that it's my manager's job to provide the feedback. And we are handing over that responsibility elsewhere. We've got to shift that mindset, change it, and start thinking, I'm going to take some ownership here. I'm going to go after the feedback. More importantly, I'm going to chase my own personal development. I will go after it. Right? So that's a mindset shift number 2 that I believe we all have to do. Stop relying on your managers to provide you with the feedback and coaching opportunities and coaching conversations. Take ownership of it and start going after it. So that's the second one. The second one is the frequency, but there's one more thing that I just realized I haven't really mentioned. The reason why we have to change that mindset, it's not only for our own personal development that we have to go after it. We've got to also change it on the team level and organizational level, because it creates a system where feedback is something that only manager can share. And that's a huge mistake. There are so many opportunities missed if we start bracketing feedback and putting it into hierarchy and just boxing things off. You can share feedback with him, you cannot. It's just wrong. We have to start thinking not about it as our job, but as our, what's that? We have to start thinking about feedback as it is our moral responsibility, our moral duty. That's how we should start viewing feedback conversations, right? Perhaps you're in a position as well, and you still sometimes you told myself, I wish somebody told me that in the past, earlier or sooner. Yes, that's true. Somebody should have mentioned something to you, and they had the experience, they had the knowledge. But feedback can be quite stressful and nervous, and people often withholding the feedback from others. We can change it and we can start going after it. So the whole shift needs to happening from it's manager's job to share the feedback into it's everyone's moral responsibility, moral duty to share feedback. So it starts flowing in every direction with daily like frequency, and that's point number 3. So the third thing that we have to really embrace more in our workplace, and that is change our belief and understanding of frequency with which feedback is being shared with. To withhold or delay feedback from others is to manipulate with their personal development, but also is to manipulate with people's emotional well-being. I will never forget when I shared unsolicited feedback to a manager named Regan. It was like 3-4 years ago. She's an amazing manager. She's incredible at what she does, and I wasn't working with her, I just observed that. And eventually I just shared my feedback in quite a detailed way. There was one reaction that I didn't anticipate to have, and that was she was holding back tears, and she told me, if I'm 6 months into management and nobody told me what I'm doing right. And imagine yourself for 6 weeks questioning yourself whether you're good at what you're doing. Let's just trim it down. Let's say that your habit or your organizational structure allows for really good feedback conversations to take place every 4 weeks. Right? It's more periodical. Imagine how it feels to be kept in the dark for 4 weeks, and then you heard that you haven't done something wrong. Now it's a time for performance reviews. I'm fairly sure we've all been in a position where we've been working for 6 months or 12 months, and during our performance reviews, we've heard something that we haven't heard months prior to that. It's a surprise, right? It's not uncommon. It's quite common. Part of the problem here is that we tend to view feedback as a part of our job and as a part of a process that is formal. It's a formal process. It's a structured process, and it isn't. It's just for some reason we get ourselves in the position when it became that sort of ways of sharing feedback. I like to use a lot of sports examples, guys, and one of that I always use when I talk about frequency of the feedback is I ask question, imagine where would football teams or any sporting teams or athlete would be if coaches would sit with their athletes, with a team every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks, every 4 months. It has to be a daily frequency. So we got to change that understanding and that mindset, and we need to work towards sharing ad hoc real-time feedback conversations, because think about the best feedback that you've received. I bet that it was more of an ad hoc conversation. Somebody just was courageous enough to share it on the spot in real time that had a real value to it. And that's when the feedback really becomes valuable and you can really grow as an individual. Oh, I've got first person joining my room, Kieran. Hey, Kieran, how are you doing? I've decided to join in Clubhouse as well as LinkedIn streams with my feedback Q&A sessions, and thank you for joining, man. I appreciate it. I'm talking about feedback mistakes that we tend to do and habits that we picked up along the way that really are not helping with creating this environment of feedback that is exciting and something positive. So that's the topic of today's session. So 3 is the frequency, guys. The 4th one, it's a part of our mindset, but also part of our habits that we picked up from other managers. It's a place, emotions, and time. I like to call it PET. You are always in charge and in control of these 3 things. Whilst emotions might sound like, well, I'm not always in control of my emotions, what you are in control is in understanding and perceiving your emotional state right now, which then dictates you whether you should or shouldn't provide a certain feedback. Okay, so remember, whilst feedback should be delivered in real time and as close to them as possible, you got to be mindful that certain places and timings shouldn't be treated literally on the face value here and now. I've received a certain feedbacks that was well intended, but they were timed wrongly, and the whole value changed. And here's what's happening, guys. So when the feedback is valuable and is relevant to you, but you share it at the wrong time, in the wrong place, the person on the receiving end focus and attention will move away from the value of your feedback and will focus on your intention and what emotion state I am right now. So I worked for years in hospitality, and we were cleaning at one table, and there were different guests around us. And one of the managers approached me with feedback, and it was really good feedback. Oh, hold on, I just realized I'm on the Wi-Fi on my live stream, not on the cabled one. Let me fix that, guys, because I don't think it's the best quality. Sorry. So the feedback was delivered. It was a really good one, very valid one, top notch. But I couldn't focus on the feedback, on the value of it, because it was shared in a way that guests could heard it. And I was more focused on being uncomfortable with that idea, and not even personally, because I'm a feedback savvy person. I was worried the perception that we're creating for our guests if I'm being challenged in front of everyone else. And so, you know, I get it. Some environments are busy, and especially hospitality, but the time and place, you gotta get right, because otherwise you're sending a wrong message. And here's another example that we'll never forget about it. So I worked at Wagamama at some point, and still part of Wagamama actually. And one of the managers tried to comfort an employee. It was really supportive, because that particular employee, unfortunately, knocked the glass of water, and that water went on the guest's mobile phone. And as we know, how difficult situation it becomes, and you know, guests, they don't think that they should keep on the tiny tables their phones when there's loads of liquids. They would just blame the waiter, they would just blame the employee, and it happened, right? And it happens quite frequently. And so the situation was solved with the guests, and the manager tried to, you know, have a really supportive conversation with the manager. But the way he was positioned, she was backwards to the wall, to the bar, and he was talking to her. The whole floor could see the situation. Two employees joining by the, you know, to the side of that employee. And if you look from the outside, it looked like that poor girl is in trouble because she spilled that water on that table. And she wasn't. The manager was comforting her. But the place and time was wrong. The whole environment was just wrong, even for the positive feedback. And it doesn't really matter that you know it was a good one. Even she knew. It's just, if that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, you're not focusing on it anymore. You're consumed with how uncomfortable the situation for you is and stressful for you is. So you want to control that place and time, and always be mindful. I like the few tips that Brené Brown shared around around sharing feedback. And one advice from Brené Brown was this: if you don't feel like to sit beside the person and you have to sit across the person, it's not a good time to have difficult conversation. And I like it, because it really shows you, if you're not willing to have this conversation side by side without any barrier, i.e. table, or being, you know, across each one to another, more likely you're not in the right state of your mind or emotions to have this conversation. So please be mindful. You're always in control of place and time, and at the very least, you are aware about how you're feeling, and you understand whether you should have this conversation right now or not. Because if you bring the wrong emotions to the conversation in the first few seconds, people can sense it. And the first few seconds, first 5 to 10 seconds, are crucial in order to get people in that receptive state, not defensive. And by bringing those negative emotions into the conversation, we are putting them on the back foot, and they're no longer going to engage with us in the way we want. Okay. Okay, so another habit that we're picking up. I mentioned right at the beginning, guys, that certain habits are part of how we observe other managers, and we pick up the clues from them in the absence of quality feedback training. Some of them are part of our communication habit, how we tend to communicate with others. What's our language? How do we start conversations? We don't really pay that much attention towards it. We know when we are on the receiving end, when we are providing feedback, it's not part of our focus, right? And I realized that when I was listening to my younger son, Xavier, who's 10 today. It was a few years ago. Not today, sorry, he's 10 right now, not today. And he tended to say, "Hey Dad, this is the worst song ever, and this is the best cartoon ever." And I'm thinking, that's quite generic, because it isn't. It's for you, right? And from then onwards, I started paying more attention to how we communicate and how our statements are real, or how much is an outcome of our communication habit. So think about a situation when somebody tells you, "You never do that," or "You always do this." What's your feeling as soon as you hear that? I'll give you an example. A few days ago, I received an email, and in that email exchanged, there was a lack of clarity on the both sides. And so I, on my side, I apologized and I clarified things and I reframed things. And the email back was, "You make everything complicated." And as soon as I read that line, "You make everything complicated," all I could care right now is that this person is being unfair with me. Especially that person doesn't know me, we never met, it's just an email exchange. Thankfully, I was mindful enough and aware enough about the impact that those words have, and they don't mean literally that I'm doing everything complicated. I paused myself, like, yeah, that's an example. And in fact, it's a good example that I'll be sharing on my workshops and live streams. But if I didn't catch myself, what I was reading is as if this person literally just told me that I am type of person who makes everything so complicated that it's difficult to work with me, right? It's all because of that one word. I've met that person online. We had a few LinkedIn messages and a few email messages, and all of a sudden he tells me that I make everything complicated. So catch yourself and observe yourself and observe others. What type of language you're using and how do you start your conversation? Have you started a conversation in the past with you always do that, you never do this, you make everything that way? Why do I always have to do this? Why I never get all the information from you? If you start feedback conversation that way, more likely you're going to put people in that defensive state. Which leads me to another point, and habits of ours. We tend to share our feedback, positive one vaguely and negative one detailed. We are detailed negative and vaguely positive. Meaning, if we are having a conversation with our employees because they've made a mistake, then more likely that conversation is in a very detailed way. We're letting them know exactly what they've done wrong, when they've done wrong, what was the impact, what are the consequences, and what needs to change. When we're sharing positive feedback, it changes. It switches from being so detailed to being quite vague. Hey, well done. I'm proud of you. Top job, guys. Thank you very much for your effort, etc. But it's literally a sentence or two at the most, but it's quite vague. And then eventually what happens is it creates this feeling and perception of you as a leader that when things are wrong, you're going to town with me. If I do a good job, you either don't recognize it, and if you do, it's just very vaguely kind of, thumbs up and let's move on. And what happens essentially creates a contrast between those two types of feedback that you're sharing, which starts questioning your intention and your credibility. What you want to do is to be both detailed positive and detailed negative. Right? The context is important, but the context has to be present with both. Because otherwise, the contrast will start questioning your intention. So when you go back to your workplace, if you share some feedback, if you have some conversations, or when you're listening how people's feedback is being shared, pay a little bit more attention on those two things. Is the positive feedback just as detailed as the negative is? The outcome, the goal here is to make sure that both are detailed. Okay. Another one, and it's an important one. It's a huge one. If you start listening to the feedback conversations around you, if you are on the receiving end of the feedback, or go back and read the emails exchanges and conversations, Slack conversations, ask yourself this question: who's the primary beneficient of that feedback? Is the feedback intrinsically driven or extrinsically driven? From my experience, most of the feedback and most managers are sharing the feedback that is focused extrinsically. That the message of that feedback is, me as a manager, or we as a company, we need you as an employee to do X and Y so the company benefits from it. And that you doing your job properly. So it's all around management, employment, employee. There is very little me in that, very little intrinsic drivers within the feedback. I am not the primary beneficient of your feedback. And I realized that when I transitioned from being an athlete to being an employee, that the feedback is very much focused at work. And it doesn't really speak to me as an individual. So if you want people to really engage with your feedback, listen, and more importantly here, follow through with it, own it, commit to your feedback, you gotta make it all about them. So the question here is, if I move away from your workplace in 10 years' time, how do I benefit from this conversation? Right? We need to own the fact that people are not here for a life with you. Those times are gone, guys. Forget about it. In the grand scheme, it's just a pit stop, your workplace, whether it's for you and for others as well, right? How many years you're going to spend in one workplace? It's very rare that you're there 10, 15, 20 years. If you look at the majority of employees, they will be there, I don't know, 3, 5 years maybe. I don't know the exact statistics. But if you look at it that way, you understand people are not there with you for a lifetime. They're no longer waiting for that Rolex, for the gold watch, 25 or 20th anniversary. So the question is, how do you provide feedback that is so exciting that I really gonna listen and stay with you for a little bit longer because I'm benefiting from it? And so the way I always present it is, imagine you're the manager and you work in the restaurant and you're developing a host team. You have two options here. You can help a door host become a better host, teach them how to control the flow of the restaurant, how to sit in a certain section, how to control the flow, how to greet your guests, etc., and how to manage the bookings and how to organize the bookings. Those are important skills and it's an important part of the job. In fact, that is the job. But if your feedback continuously tells, hey, this is how you have to do your job as a door host, eventually they're like, I'm just in here for 2 years. Why would I even bother to listen all the time and improve it? Change the conversation and say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to say no, even though those impatient people want you to say yes. And being a door host is just a tool to achieve exactly that. Now it becomes a lifetime skill. Now it becomes intrinsically driven because I'm teaching you something that you can use in 20, 30 years' time as a person. Regardless of your goals, you always have to know how to say no, even though everyone else wants you to say yes. You're going to have to deal with strong emotions. You're going to have to hold back your emotions sometimes and be a little bit more patient. Again, so the conversation here is it important to behave professionally and don't chat back? Or the question here is it important to work on your impulse control as an individual? Frame your feedback that way and people will listen and tune in. Tell them that they behave as unprofessional, they have to behave more professionally, and they are less likely to listen and commit to your feedback, okay? So guys, just to recap those habits that I covered today, they're not all, the list is not full, there are different as well, guys. I choose 8 for today. So let me quickly, guys, recap that. Number 1, stop or limit usage of word feedback. It's quite important. The more you use word feedback, the more people will be stressed because feedback has that negative connotation today. Number 2, frequency. To withhold feedback from people is to manipulate with their development, and manipulate with their emotional well-being. Change the mindset and shift it from feedback as something that happens every week, every 4 weeks, to something that is happening every single day, almost, right? That's the frequency that you have to work towards. Another one, place, emotional state, and time. You are in control of those 3 things. Pay more attention where the feedback is shared, when, and what is your emotional state. We tend to focus mainly on how the other person feels and what emotions they are. Just as important it is to focus on your own as well. Okay. Another mindset shift that is required is forget that it's a manager's job to share the feedback. Forget that it's a manager's job to develop you. First of all, it's not our job to share the feedback. It's our moral responsibility. And secondly, it's in our best interest to start going after our own personal development. Next one is generic language. Always, never, everything. It's hardly ever a real statement. But when we use those words, now we start focusing on your intention because it seems unfair, right? If you tell me that I never do certain things, I would always do that, or you make everything in a certain way, then that's not true. And if I know it's not true, then what's your intention? You're being unfair with me. And I'll be absorbed with that, with defending, with protecting my social status, rather than absorbing your feedback. Avoid being vaguely positive and detailed negative. You have to be detailed both. Your positive feedback has to be just as detailed as your negative one. And last one, make feedback intrinsically driven. Make your employees the primary beneficiary of your feedback. So tune into your language, tune into the reasons why you're sharing the feedback. So it sends the clear message that I'm sharing it as a person for you as an individual. It's not manager's employee, it's a person-to-person feedback. So it's not your job to do X and Y, and it's not like you're behaving unprofessionally. You got to change it to make it more intrinsically. And the trick here is there are universal skills. There are skills that we all need to develop as people in order to be successful and happy in our lives. Even if somebody is not ambitious, doesn't want to grow as a manager or have his or her own business, they still want to be a decent, good human beings. They still want to be confident. They still want to be good partners, parents. What are the skills that you can focus on to help them, right? Think impulse control. Think body language if they want to speak in front of everyone else. Think about, being resilient, build resilience rather than being professional whilst you are at the door host or when you're on the phone calls, okay? So make the feedback intrinsically driven, guys. So those are the points for today. I hope that you guys enjoyed the session. I don't see any questions, so I will be wrapping up slowly this week's feedback Q&A, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Few updates on my podcast live interviews. So 17th, I believe, yes, 17th of March, there is one live stream, and 22nd is another one. So two great conversations, one neuroscience, one on fairness and injustice in the workplace. So keep your eyes open, guys. Those will be the live streams this month. I might have some more, but right now I'm slowing down a little bit with inviting guests because the backlog of the conversations that I have that I need to edit and release is growing. So right now I'm slowing down with how many guests I'm inviting on my podcast, guys. But so that's that. The Clubhouse announcement. I'm going to host more rooms in the Clubhouse. So if you're there, I would love to see you guys with me. If not, I've got a few spare invitations as well. Why wouldn't I share them? If you want to join Clubhouse and you don't have an invitation just yet, message me, guys. I've got like 10 spare in my inbox. I'm happy to share them with you. And what else? 23rd of March. Oh, this is a good one, guys. 23rd of March, I'm going to host a bite-sized workshop on positive feedback. I'm going to teach managers how to motivate, recognize, and coach their team, and how to use positive feedback to get busy managers to mentor you. I'm going to share how to use positive feedback to lift people and business up with one Jedi-like ability. So that's on 23rd, and on 18th, my masterclass is live, guys. So if you're looking to improve all your feedback skills and really position yourself as a feedback champion, then 18th of March, I'm launching my first open masterclass, guys. I still got some space available. So please reach out. £250 per person, guys, for 8 weeks. Group sessions, once a week, and there are some one-to-one calls as well. I'm really excited about that one. So if that's you, that resonates with you, just DM me for more details, guys. Until then, have a good day on purpose, guys. Take care and see you next week.